I want to invite onto the stage our first guest. He is Tony Alexis. He is a partner at Gibson and the former head of enforcement at the CFPB. We're going to have a chat with Tony. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's so great to have you here. So, and your former title was head of regulation at the CFPB and not the BFCP, which have you all heard this? The new administration is trying to change the name to the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection.
So I do want to raise a couple of issues first. I'm at Goodwin, not at Gibson.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I have to say that
big
before
difference.
I get fired. And the second thing is I think it's elegant that you would bring me up after you started talking about artificial intelligence. I think the symmetry is great. So I was the head of enforcement. I was the acting the assistant director of the Bureau, and my portfolio was enforcement, so that made me the head of enforcement. The name has changed in terms of what the lexicon or what they call themselves. But if you look at the statute, it says Congress shall create the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection.
So we're going to call it the Bureau.
And so the acting director has said we're going to call it by its statutes.
Although I have found myself in law enforcement circles lately on anti-money laundering, and if you say the Bureau there, they have a different one in mind. They're thinking the FBI. But we'll set that aside for the moment.
Right.
So I just want to start by asking you to talk about I love talking to people who've just left regulatory agencies because you know everything and you also feel more free to say what you think about everything typically. And so we'd like to hear from you about the main things that you worked on at the CFPB and what you think the audience should understand about them.
Right, and it is a dance. It's a delicate dance because the last thing you want to do as a new regulator, a person who's an ex-regulator, is to critique your agency in a way in which you would say, well, what the hell did you do for the last 5 years if you're now criticizing it and basically acknowledging a lot of mistakes. So let me set the clock back or turn the clock back, and we are a nation that thrives on crisis, and we move from crisis to crisis. The agency was born in a crisis, and specifically the financial meltdown, and probably the critical aspect of the financial meltdown was the mortgage market. If you read the statute specifically prioritized rule writing in the mortgage space. And in addition, then it took a lot of other agencies, took some statutes, and kind of poured them into a particular agency that would become a subject matter expert in this area. And so it was generally called consumer protection. There was a sense that it had been ignored by some agencies, and in some other agencies it had not been given a certain level of priority, or kind of, if you watch baseball, you see a pop-up, everyone thinks that the other player is going to get it, and this drops right in the middle. And so putting it into one particular body where there was a focus, expertise, and it was going to be prioritized, that was kind of like the nature of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So when I got there, there weren't a heck of a lot of people yet. We had the concept of building regional enforcement offices, and that was my charge and my responsibility. Had some great success. You'll hear from one of the alum, Paula Tuffin, who was the first person in New York, and she was a steal for me. Then after that, then we transitioned into, what are we going to do? So the biggest focus that we had to figure out is, how do you take 18 laws with probably 20 different types of markets, whether it's credit card, mortgage servicing, mortgage origination, deposits, deposit cards, and take all of that and make sense of restoring sanity in some aspects of the market, but actually enforcing violation in other parts of the market without having everyone run to what they consider to be their pet project. Along with that, HUD transferred authorities over to the CFPB, and you had to, start basically looking at those cases and figuring out in a triage method which ones were you going to handle first. So like RESPA, which gave us PHH and ILSA, et cetera. And then our big focus was hiring and the strategic plan. And the strategic plan was driven by several things: managing our resource, in addition to managing our resource, finding out where the other agencies were, FTC, the Fed Reserve Board, the OCC, FDIC, what were they planning to do, what were they already doing, and make sure that you could bring some sense of a strategic plan that would effectively handle the market and discharge our responsibilities while still hiring people.
Yeah, so the CFPB, or the Bureau, is still a young agency, and yet it has now already been really sort of convulsed by a shift in the winds and a new set of leadership. What do you think the audience here should understand or be thinking about as they think about working with the new Bureau, the Bureau as it's evolving?
So I would look at several different things. The first thing is, yes, every change of administration, even if it's from party to party, the person who comes in has the right to take a look at the market for the first time, decide what his or her priorities are going to be, decide what their view of the market, how the market should work, whether they want it to be a Washington-centric organization or whether they want it to be a dispersed organization that functions and thrives on what I'll call the regional models, like some of the regulators do. And there's an opportunity for a reboot. I don't think that people should interpret it as, well, they haven't been active in my particular space, they haven't been active in my market, therefore I can pretend that they're not here and therefore go back to old ways and decrease my expenditures on compliance because, well, no one's going to take a look at me, or some of the activity which other organizations had enforced against them, take an attitude, well, there's more of us than there are of them, therefore we can go back to certain types of behaviors that may violate the laws. Instead, what you should do is look at it as an opportunity, and where there's a chance or an opportunity to speak sensibly to the regulator, what worked, what didn't work, what you can tolerate, monetize what the CFPB was demanding, or in some cases show the consumer side of it. And when I say the consumer side, I'm talking about both sides, where consumers were getting harmed because of the acts of the organization, but where consumers may have been collaterally damaged by the Bureau because some of its activity caused people to change the way their products work, or they abandoned certain products or markets, et cetera. So you should look at it as an opportunity. But the last thing I would say is you should not just say, okay, well then let's just pull the plug on compliance and rest for a while.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that with the rest of the panel as well. But in the moment that we have left together, what do you think about the discussion of whether the original Bureau has been too enforcement heavy, and what do you anticipate is going to happen in terms of the mix of enforcement, supervision, rulemaking, and so on going forward? So
you're talking about the person who headed the Office of Enforcement.
That's
and there was so much more I wanted to do, but I didn't have the resources. So it's funny when everyone said we're enforcement heavy. I felt we're enforcement light. Here's my sense. I think if you look at the total resources, the Office of Enforcement was 150 people. And the Office of Supervision was I think around 800 or 900 or 700.
With the field examiners.
Most of the activity is examination.
Yeah.
I had a good audience because the person that was head of enforcement before me, one of them was Rich Cordray. Rich Cordray became the director. He was an attorney general. And if you were here yesterday, you heard how attorney generals speak. I had an audience that would listen if there was a chance of going forward in an enforcement action which had a certain element of risk to it. And the risk was that the facts might not be completely developed, or There's you know, competing theories in terms of how the law should be interpreted. And because he had that appetite, and then I understood where it was, then I think that you could get more enforcement activity really out the door. I think, looking currently, I'm not too sure that the pause represents that they're not going to do enforcement. I think there's a ramp up in learning, you know, time, and I think, not to mention the name of the company, but just recently a company got fined $1 billion, you know, by the CFPB. So I'm not too sure it means that the door's shut.